we'll get started on learning Bash. And
Yeah.
when I was doing web work dating back to the 90s, I was always kind of frightened of Linux and never was able to really. I tried understanding it. I left that whole part aside. And now that I'm retired, I decided I'd look at some new things. And I had a project I wanted. And I went ahead and thought Bash would do it. And I found that Bash learning it wasn't that hard. And I got the lessons on YouTube from a fellow from Flint, and he has got a very thorough system on learning Linux, and it's his full-time job. And I found out he now lives in South Carolina on the coast, so he must be doing pretty well. Um, Bash, it stands for Born Again Shell Interpreter, and all the Linux versions have it that I know of, and it's on the Mac. It's not on the PC, but there's a way to get it on the PC. But you need to install WSL that gives you a Linux shell. So you have the best of both worlds. You have Windows and you can switch and get on Linux to do things that only Linux enables. Um, you can use PowerShell and go into the Microsoft Store, or you can do it on the command line. And once it's there, you need to update it. I've never understood why, when you install something, they wouldn't give you the latest update, but there's a lot of companies that do it that way. I think Cold Fusion, isn't it? You get it, and
Yep.
you don't get the latest, and you have to do updates for it. Okay, you want to know what your home directory is for it? You just type where bash, and you can use Notepad as an editor, but the Linux and the default is Ubuntu, but I guess you can choose other ones when you install WSL.
Yes.
And Nano is the more popular editor, and that was the example he used in the tutorials. And I'm going to list that at the very end. The extension is SH. The problem, I guess maybe security benefit from Linux and Unix is that you don't normally, the default is non-executable file. So you have to make it executable, and it gives you the permission. You have to be logged in as root. And if you want to view the current directory, PWD, because it's not going to tell you, unlike Windows. Now, it has a little thing called a shebang. And when you write a script, an .sh program, it has to have the shebang. And I guess Linux uses that. Maybe Nick would know, to know for sure that it may have an extension, but if it has a shebang, it is definitely an executable file that is bash. You know?
Yeah, so essentially you can do char. So when you're writing these scripts, they're known as char scripts. So those can be interpreted by pretty much any of the command line interpreters. So in the earlier Linux days, and particularly when you get into the Unix days, they all came with different interpreters. These days, like everything modern has Bash available. Oh, so because they all have Bash available, that's pretty much what everybody uses. But there were other ones that exist. So when I work with my like AT&T System 7 stuff, we use ZSH, which is I don't know what it stands for, but that's the command interpreter for there, which is just slightly different. There are other ones that you can just do just SH, which just regular char. Um, that can be an interpreter as well, which has some advantages or disadvantages depending on what you're trying to do. But this here essentially is saying, yes, we know this is a script and we know this is going to be run with Bash, as opposed to some other interpreter.
Okay. Here's hello world. Every program, if it's a language, has got to do a hello world. You can echo things, And again, PWD gives you the working directory. You can use variables, and here's an example of that. You can copy the directory names to a variable. And I didn't point out, if you use a pound sign, and that allows you to do a comment in the script. It won't run. And they have Linux, or all Unix, I guess, has got environmental variables. And if you type env, it gives you all the environmental and system variables. And if you do use one of those in your script, and I guess you can, I think they're the only thing that are capitalized. Is that right, Nick? They're all caps?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Well, you got to
In
mimic it
Windows,
anyway because
say in
Linux,
Windows, they're all capitals, but
yeah.
for Linux, I don't think they necessarily are. I forget.
Okay. Linux is case sensitive. Most CF programmers are aware of that. You can do math, and I think the bottom one I must have taken notes wrong because I don't think 100 times 50 is 150. So that must be a plus sign. Um, Anybody have any questions about that? The interesting thing is, because the uses of the asterisk that you've got to point out is for multiplication, you have to escape it with a backslash. And it has if statements. And one interesting thing, again, rather than a backslash, um, you basically, it's just the opposite. If it's reversed, phi. If it's case, it's ESAC. And we'll have an example on that. It took me the longest time getting used to reading that. It seems simple, but I'm so used to seeing it another way. And you can also do an else statement. I wrote batch files back in the DOS days, and it didn't have some of those things back then. And this is powerful. Then here's an example with else. And it also has equal. You do have the equal, greater than, but they have to have a dash in front of them. I'm not sure why, but they just do. And we've got a part 3. And there's an alternative way to describe it. And exit codes. Now that's a little bit new to me, the way they describe that. But if a program doesn't run, you need to know. And if it runs successfully, and say it installs or does your backup script, it's going to have a 0. And if it fails, it's a 2. And you can check for that, and you can, email yourself or something that the script failed, and it will have the logs sent to the file name of your choosing. Again, E for equals. That's a little hard to get used to, but it's not that hard to get used to. And again, it shows that it failed to install, and it puts it in a failure log.
So this is something the error codes is actually something that even like MS DOS and PowerShell and all those support as well.
Okay.
So if
If,
you
if, if they
wrote
did
a
in the DOS days, I didn't learn that part, I guess.
Yeah, in the old BBS things, like everything that's spun off from BBSs, like they always had like a definition of what the different error codes were. Um, 0 always meant it was successful and ran completely, and then anything other than 0 either meant an error or some other code that they had to communicate with you to do something with.
Okay. And they have what they call packages, and a lot of the Linux come with the packages, and they don't always. And so you may have to install different packages like HTOP here. You can do while loops. And again, Don't use it often, but it can be handy. And you have noticed that the VARs are prefaced, I didn't mention on the earlier screens, by the $sign. And this example shows how you test whether a file exists or not. But in this particular example, he did it as something to see if I guess we were awake in the lesson. If it exists, you go into an endless loop. But of course, there's a way to test for that. Anybody have any questions or comments, or feel like I'm going kind of fast? For those people that are watching the recording, it's a long story, but wasn't able to get my Mac connected, and I don't have a working microphone on my PC. So if I look back and forth, I'm looking at the screen and I'm looking back at the camera. For loops, which are really nice. And this example, again, any CFer, this is pretty good. The practical example here is they do a tar, which is actually in Linux I don't know if it's exact same as zip, but it's a zip file. It's readable by a zip file on Windows.
So tar files are essentially a precursor to zip, but they do not compress. So if you have a tar
Oh,
file, it's literally they just dump all the files in one. They concatenate all those files together, and then you can do something like a gzip, or in your case, there you actually have like -z, which does zip it afterwards. But
okay. That's what the CZVF does.
C is create, Z is zip it up afterwards, V is verify, and F coming from a file.
Okay. That's one thing he did not clarify. I guess maybe he assumed we knew it if we knew a little about Linux. But I've dealt with tar files before that were zipped. That's why. Okay, here's some just general advice that he said that, storing these scripts, you got to put them in a central, or urge that you put them in a central location where everybody has access to them. The root's the only one who has access to it. They can't use them. USR local bin is, I guess, the most common across all Linux distributors. But what I've learned also is that some of them do things different just to do things different. So your version may vary. Here's how to move a file to a desired directory. Again, you got to learn some of this. It's not really bad. Bash really. It's commands from the operating system, which if you're Windows, you might not know. Here's how to give it root only permission to modify it if you don't want your help modifying it. And you want to add a directory to the path. Here's how to do it. I find this kind of like reading Greek a little bit, but after a while, you sort of can figure it out. Okay, data streams I found interesting, and there's 3 types. There's standard for error messages, and standard input. Input is where you get something from the user. You ask them to type in a number, a yes or a no, or whatever. And I think you can use them to stream. Nick, can you use it to stream to like a different server from the server you're on if you wanted to run a script or something?
So the standard data streams are only within the same command environment.
Oh, okay. I was
So there
wrong.
are ways to stream data to other servers and things like that, but those use what they call Unix pipes and that type of stuff, which is a little bit different.
Okay. Does that be like pipes?
Yeah, they call them Unix pipes, or then you can also go to like TCP and that type of stuff. But it's a different way of communicating between servers. But
Okay. Here is a data stream and install file. And it's a little complex, but if anybody, like where it says sudo pacman, it ends up failing. It goes to a log file. And you can also choose a different version. And it's declared a bunch of variables at the top. You also have functions, and you can build your own function library. And if people remember tag libraries in CF, I kind of like the idea of building functions. If you do a lot of this, if you're a system guy or a wannabe system guy, you can let people write scripts, and you have functions for them to use. They can't modify the functions, and it just makes things more bulletproof, I think. You ever written a lot of functions, Nick?
I don't do a ton with functions because I don't tend to do a lot of like reusable things, but the scripts that I do are more like one and done type of stuff. I don't tend to write a lot of scripts for like public consumption. So,
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, again, it makes it more like a language. It's got case statements, and here you're choosing your favorite Linux distribution, and it has a command read distro, and then it processes it and gives you a message based on your choice. And there is the infamous ESAC to close the case statement. Again, I don't think for average programmer any of this stuff is. It may seem unusual. You may have a hard time getting used to it, but you can make it work and do some things that make your life a little easier. You also have the ability to do scheduling. Use the at command. At command is one of those that you might have to install. I don't know how common it is with the yeah. And here's how to install it. And you just set it up with time to run it. And there's a very short script and a lot of explanations. It uses military time, so 1800 would be 6 p.m. Um, you can type ATQ. It'll show you which jobs are scheduled, or somebody else has scheduled a job. There's a job number attached to them. And if you have that number, you can actually delete the job from the queue, as well as running one off in the future. You can schedule things for years in advance if you want to do so. Cron jobs, um, there's reasons from a security standpoint you want to put a full path in them. Again, that's not something we always do, CF world, but um, if you're echoing, you can go right to the echo command. And again, the reason that's done, I guess, is that a hacker could run a script echo that deletes your files or does something terrible. And he's going to otherwise have to guess the path. And you don't have to use, USR bin. You could choose something else, so he wouldn't know how to get at it. But I think if they get in the distribution, they could probably find it. But it makes it a little harder anyway. And again, here's an even more extreme one line of code, and there's seven uh, seven explanations for it. And the first is the minute. So it's like the 30-minute mark. It's like Europeans, I guess they got the date backwards, or they'd say correct. Then you've got the hour in military time. day of the month. Um, Fourth number is the month. Then day of the week. And remember, hard for CFers because everything starts with one, but in this world, Sunday's a 0, not a 1. Um, and here's how to create a cron tab. And I don't know what a cron tab is, Nick.
So you've got the cron file, and then you have to add it to essentially the system that's running essentially that database.
Oh, okay. That's what's called a cron tab because I don't think he explained that when he was talking, or I missed it because I took my time
Cron is
going
a
through.
you say cron is like the Windows scheduler, like it's always running in the background, waiting for stuff to run. So
Okay.
you kind of say, "Hey, this is something I want to run," and then you say you actually like submit it to it.
Okay. And you have arguments. And you can calculate how many objects are in a directory, for example, with the second one there. Leaning on you a lot hard, Nick, because I know you know all this stuff. What is WC in that fifth line?
Word count.
Pardon?
Word
Where it
count.
says lines
Word
equal.
count. Yeah, here you go. Yeah, word count.
Sometimes people use it to count the number of lines. Notice it's a -L, so that's an
Okay.
argument that says don't count the words, count the lines. It's kind of funny. They didn't create an LC. They said WC-L.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Charlie. Again, it gives more power to the thing. And you can have another argument. Passing the directory, the script runs but needs one. And this way, you try to run the script without adding the argument. It'll just tell you what it needs. And less chances of people saying, well, it doesn't work. And I know a lot of times when I don't know my arguments list, I can just type it in and it'll print it out on the screen what I'm looking for. And I think it's fairly common. You'll be able to write scripts, be able to do that as well. Okay, the last thing is a backup script. I think it's a fairly powerful backup script. I think it's something I'm maybe going to use. It uses another tool called rsync, which you may have to download. And it will sync directories. And that's how you do the backup, if I'm saying that correctly. I'm not sure what -V is, but
V is verbose, so it tells you on the screen what's going on.
Okay.
Now, why he has that going to dev no, I don't know, but
Yeah.
oh, I think he's checking to see if it failed or not.
Oh,
So he's
okay.
running rsync, checks to see if it actually exists or not, and then runs it.
Okay. It's the same script, people. It's just I couldn't get it all on one screen. You capture the date and the options. And again, I don't have too many notes explaining some of this stuff, but the first line 5, AVB equals archive and verbose. That should have a comment on it. I guess when I was doing this, I saw the equal sign. That's just my shorthand as I was taking notes. It basically doesn't let you overwrite files when synchronizing directories. I've written synchronous stuff in CF, and it was 20 years ago, but I can remember being really, really hard. and to know there's a utility sitting out on the operating system that I might have been able to use that would be bulletproof is something good to know. And again, it explains everything. Somehow you can look at CF and you just know what it is, and here you gotta take it one word at a time to figure out what's going on. I need a book so I can look up things when I don't know the abbreviation. He did a pretty good job, but there's certain things he skipped over a little bit. So here's the course. There's 18 chapters to it. And it took me a couple days to get through it because I was taking really complete notes. So I don't have to go back to the video as often if I get stuck somewhere. It explains. I've tried to share kind of there's a lot more he covers, but I try to share the basics if you were getting started and if you can see the power this thing has. And it may seem a little unusual if you're used to writing in JavaScript or CF. Some CF versus JavaScript seems kind of weird. And see that there's a possibility it's worth learning. Because I think more people in CF world would benefit from knowing this. Some cases, I guess you work places and there's a system operator that runs things and doesn't want you to touch the server. Then you don't have a choice, but you can grow and learn if you do this a little bit. It's gotten so in AWS, the servers are so cheap. I think the server that runs our website for the user group is like $23, $24 a month. That's pretty inexpensive. You just want to launch a server to play around with it. And if you're actually YouTube playlist for the account, Learn Linux TV. Yep. And you can shut it down at night when you're not using it and probably spend $5 or $10 a month and be able to test a lot of stuff on Linux. And again, I never was interested, but I have more time now. And I like to nerd out, I guess. So that's all, unless you got some questions. And luckily, we've got Nick on here who's uses Linux and Unix for his day job. That's why I've been leaning out so much to him. He may answer half the questions if they're complicated, but I'm used to him doing that anyway in the meetings, regardless of the topic.
So yeah, a couple things that I'd note. If you don't want to install WSL, so WSL is the Windows subsystem Linux. Essentially, that's a feature of Windows. However, when you do install it, it actually installs the whole Hyper-V hypervisor system on your machine, which does add some weight to your computer for stuff, additional networking, all the other stuff. Some people don't like that. So for my team, I actually have them use a tool called MOBA Xterm, which is it's a shareware slash like a paid product, but you can get the free version. The neat thing about that is it actually has its own version of Bash and in an environment known as Cygwin. Essentially, it's a Linux or Unix emulator built in. It's a portable install. You can actually run it off of like a USB thumb drive, but it supports everything that you've talked about on here.
Oh wow! What can you spell that?
MOBA Xterm, MOBA XTERM.
Okay, they have a website. Is it mobaxterm.com?
From a company called MobaTech. I can paste the link in the chat here, but
okay.
Really neat tool. Like I said, it's something that you can just pop in there, and then what's neat too is it also helps you connect to servers. It actually can run X Windows on there, so if you have a remote server that does display stuff, you can actually get that back. Pretty neat tool. But like I said, I use it on a daily basis for running scripts, doing all that stuff. It actually has a pretty nice text editor built into it as well. So you mentioned that you use Nano as a text editor. It's pretty similar to like the old MS-DOS edit, but it
Oh,
actually has a graphical version of that same thing built into it.
okay.
So,
I
so
wished I
that's
had
one
known
thing
about
I'd note. One of the books I keep on going back to as well. I know that Charlie has the YouTube playlist, and everything's on YouTube these days. But I still like a Dead Tree sitting on my desk here. But there's actually the old Unix for Dummies book, and the author, I like to say, is John Levine. Um, it's an older book. It's a little bit dated at this point, but if you get like the newer Linux based ones, they typically just talk about X Windows and the graphical interfaces and things like that, not the command line stuff. Where this book here specifically talks about a lot of command line tools. So I found that like I said, I still go to that on a very regular basis to obscure commands. Like I was literally had the thing open. Um, oh yeah, thank you, Charlie. There, but yeah, what I was literally like thumbing through that for that WC command because I'm like that's not one I use very often. So what does WC really mean? Yeah, of course word count, but that's something that I go to fairly often. And like I said, I've got that sitting on my desk here for those more obscure things, and you can find that book probably used for like $5 at this point. Um, when you're in a command line for like things like WSL and that type of stuff, so anytime you've got that bash script, there's a very, very useful command called man, M-A-N. So you can type in man and then space any command afterwards, and it'll actually pull up the help document for that command. So, like for example, if you're trying to figure out how the different commands for like wget, so if you need to pull a file down off of a web server or something like that, you can type in man space wget, and it actually pulls like the full documentation right on the screen there. So that's really useful for learning again some of these more obscure commands as well.
Wow, thank you. That helps quite a bit.
Let me jump in with something to follow up on that because this is another really nice thing. The man pages are awfully big and they
Yep.
sometimes have what they really need to stress towards the top, but sometimes they don't. And so there's an awesome free Linux tool that you can implement in pretty much any Linux distro, and it's called TLDR. Too long, didn't read TLDR. And if you just install that, you can then instead of saying man WC and reading all about the 30 or 40 pages of the man manual, if you just say TLDR WC, you see just the most important handful of lines. And perhaps while I'm talking, Nick's already thinking about installing it to check it out. And Rick, you might want to as well if you're going to be getting into this stuff, because as he says, you're needing to find what the syntax is just great. And of course, you can Google stuff, use whatever search engine you want, use AI. But I'm telling you, TLDR, whatever you're looking for, it's great. And it's free and it's widely supported, and there's nothing to worry about from it. And I put it, as the commercial says, I put that bleep on everything. So
Thanks,
also, let
Charlie.
me follow up about WSL. It's true that it leverages Hyper-V. And by the way, so does multipass. If anybody's familiar with that, multipass is Ubuntu's canonical's way of implementing VMs for Ubuntu, nice and easy. And that's nice. You should check it out, multipass. But it's a weird word. I don't know why they would call it multipass, but moving on, it leverages Hyper-V as well. So unfortunately, lots of, you gotta, in Windows environment, you got to run a VM of some sort to run Linux. You can certainly just implement VirtualBox or other various options to do VMs, and the one you'd mentioned is probably a lighter weight version that's appealing to people that don't want something heavy. But I just want to throw out about WSL something that's easy to miss, because a lot of people do characterize it as simply a way to launch a whatever, like say Ubuntu. It could be anything, could be Debian, could be whatever you want. It supports about 7 or 8 different distros. And people think, well, it's just another way to run a VM. Au contraire, my frere. WSL is not just, and I'm speaking to everybody, including everybody on the recording. It's not just another way to run a VM. It's really integrated powerfully into Windows. And check it out. You could run WSL commands from the Windows command line, like the WC or whatever, rsync, whatever thing that's in Linux. You can run it from the command line of Windows by saying WSL whatever, and it'll just run it. And that's like, okay, big deal. So what? But it is a pretty big deal because you could then point it to, like a file on your Windows file system. You don't need to go into the VM and then somehow figure out, how do I point back to the file that was on the Windows host? No, you could just say WSL, do something against a file on the Windows host, or leverage an app that's running on a port on the Windows host, or in the when you go into WSL, you could start CoFusion on Linux in WSL, and the port that it listens on, you can get to it from a browser on the host and literally just say localhost colon that port. So it does all kinds of powerful integration of the file system, the network. And of course, some people will find something about that's not appealing. But when you appreciate what it's doing, it really is. I'm just saying it's more than just another way to run a VM. Of course, you could just run, Hyper-V or run a I was going to say VirtualBox, or just run another Hyper-V instance. Yes, you can. You can just spin up a Hyper-V Linux that you want, and then that's in its own little world. It's truly a VM. But WSL is more than that. It integrates the two. And by the way, it goes the other direction as well. You could be in the WSL VM. It really is a VM. You could be in there at its command prompt. It's all everything you've shown in this talk. But you can point to files on the Windows host, which it's just built in. You don't need to do any funny business with, drivers and volumes. It's there. So I'll leave you all to explore it if you want to. I find a lot of value in WSL, and it gets short shrift a lot of times from different corners, and I'm trying to fight that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like WSL, I always install. I know that certain in corporate environments they don't let you install it, and because I know our PCs, for example, you can't put it on there. And then there's also some requirements on it as well. It's becoming less of an issue now, that especially if you're on Windows 11. But
yes, yeah. And WSL 2 was an advance over the old original WSL. And by the way, Docker Desktop on Windows by default leverages WSL 2, and it would implement it if you didn't. And so if you get into using Docker Desktop to run Linux VMs, not Linux containers on Windows, it's all hidden from you, but under the covers, it's really spinning up a WSL VM in the background. It happens to be on Ubuntu by default, and you don't even know it. You just run your container, and it's hidden from you. But it's leveraging all this magic. It really is. But again, like so many things, there's always something that'll rankle somebody. So for most people, it'll be beneficial. For some, they'll have their reasons to quibble. And it'll, as you say, it'll get better over time.
A few years ago, I was doing a lot of stuff with JavaScript, and a lot of the frameworks and the utilities, you'd want to be on the beta because it did something you wanted, and you want to be on the cutting edge. And it wouldn't run on Windows. I'm not sure what it was they were doing underneath. They'd eventually get it to run on Windows, but sometimes you'd have to wait 6 months. And having the Mac was
there you go.
Kind of useful for that, so if you want to experiment with it. But at the time I was on a Windows server, so I could experiment with it and be ready to go, but I had to wait until they got it running on Windows. And I think that, I don't know what it is, but now that doesn't seem to be a problem. Everything from the bleeding edge, with most of them, even if they develop it on the Mac, it runs on Windows perfectly fine. May have a different set of bugs. I don't know. But they were dependent on something.
The two worlds are
and it wouldn't let them.
Microsoft
run.
being behind WSL shows how much they support it. And the two worlds really are converging. The day may come in the future where they're transparently so. But I'll tell you, once you start to explore WSL, you start to realize they are working towards making it transparently integrated. It really is amazing.
I think that was part of the emphasis for WSL,
That's what I'm saying.
was having it available, so
Yep.
that you wouldn't have that problem. But and there's software that's available only on the Mac, even to this day, and some of it's really good. It's not that you can't get programs, uh, utilities on Windows, but they're not as good sometimes as the one on the Mac, and they're moving away from
Yeah.
that as well.
Unix, Unix
I
under the
got
cover.
one for you. So, congratulations, Rick, on learning something new and looking into some certain area. You're one of the guys that I know that will always be picking up and reading and learning, like ever since I've like known you. My question, and Charlie kind of alluded to it, like they're trying to become one, and I was like, will one ever die off? I mean, I understand why Nick is doing it. I mean, he's dealing with like phone systems, and I don't think they will ever die out of those systems. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Charlie says they're going to converge.
You're talking about Linux versus Windows?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
I don't know. Personally, I mean, they're in very divergent paths, but they also excel at different things very well. So I see in the Linux space really being for servers and or like services and servers and that type of stuff. So your web servers, your proxies, all that type of stuff, leaning more towards Linux more and more every day. Where Windows servers are still in that GUI based file servers for uh, that type of stuff. I don't know. I mean, especially since a lot of those like really like internet server based stuff has kind of gone away. Like Microsoft really doesn't have Microsoft Exchange anymore. Yes, they kind of do, but it's kind of a dead product. You look at SharePoint, you look at a lot of those things, a lot of the that type of stuff just isn't a thing anymore. Um, Even SQL Server, I mean, you can get Microsoft SQL Server running on Linux now too. In fact, that's one of their preferred things in the cloud. So I don't know, Charlie, what are your thoughts?
No, that's exactly right. And I just want to clarify, when I said converge, I meant from the perspective of a Windows person, not a Linux person. Linux people are never going to be interested in running things in Windows, and they're always going to think we don't need anything but Linux. I get that. But Windows people, I'm saying that Microsoft is seeking to make the distinction between Windows and Linux for a Windows person to be less noticeable. And by the way, I didn't say this, but we started talking about this subject, I just realized here's another one. There's GUI apps for Linux, right? Or you don't think of them maybe as GUI apps, but you open like even Nano, for example. Nano is like a GUI app of an editor, right? Rick, you explored that probably.
Yep.
You can run Nano from the command line in Windows, and you will see Nano on your screen. You don't have to open a VM and run Nano within the VM. You could just run it. Well, I'm saying keep going. Then there's, other apps that are truly GUI style apps that are Linux apps, and someone will write some cool thing that'll run in Linux, for example, and they're not going to write it to run in Windows, right? There's been a long time, just bifurcation between the two, where somebody who wanted to make a lot of money creating something had to decide, am I going to make the money from selling it in the Linux world where people tend to not want to pay, or in the Windows world where people tend to understand they have to pay for some things. Well, now someone could create a cool Linux thing, and someone from Windows could actually run it in a way that's virtually transparent to you that it's Linux. And that's what I meant, is that I think that will converge more to the point where I don't know what it'll be, but I just think we'll find that things work more transparently. And that's in the favor of moving towards Linux. I think Microsoft recognizes that in the future there's going to be a stronger and stronger pull towards Linux than Windows. And
Well, and I think,
they're
to
making
that
it possible.
note, like, Linux historically has always had a leg up in that DevOps space. Being able to
Yeah.
script things, being able to, set up packages so that they're repeatable and all that type of stuff, where Windows has always kind of struggled for that. They've never made it super easy to, let's say, hey, I need to set up 10 web servers that are identical, that have all these settings, that always have the correct certs. Like, you can do it, but it's not, they don't make it easy, and then you end up having to, push out random PowerShell scripts and make sure you actually run them on each server and all this other stuff. Where Linux, they've built in that concept of being able to script things and have repeatable deployments and all that stuff. I mean, I'm thinking back even to the mid 90s, when we first started using, like when Linux first started becoming a thing in the scene. That was a common thing. In fact, one of my first jobs out of college was when I was working for Lucent. Literally, my job was writing scripts to deploy phone servers. Essentially, we shipped an ISO, and we literally went in through the whole installer script, deployed all the RPMs, all that type of stuff, and made every server identical, deployed regardless of what type of hardware it was on. And that's something you never really got, to that level within Windows. So, I mean, on the Windows side, they're trying to embrace being able to use a lot of these tools that have been around for, let's just say, 40 years at this point.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So rather than them thinking they've got to create them,
Yep.
they're thinking, why don't we just make it easier for people to leverage them? And there's always going to be friction because someone's not going to like the way it's done, or they're going to show that it works better natively in Linux. And I could tell you some command line things you would do that in Linux that just works, and you do it in Windows from the command line or from PowerShell, and it doesn't quite work because there's differences in aspects of their, shell interpreters. But once you get over that hump, you realize, oh, okay, I just need to know if I'm going to do it from Windows, I got to follow a couple different rules. Well, that I just think they're going to work on making that more and more seamless, as to your point, so that people on Windows can do more of that stuff and yet not have to leave Windows, right? That's the whole point. If they could make you stay on Windows in an environment where someone's paying for it, that's to Microsoft's advantage, and they'll leverage what they can from the things that are familiar from the years of Windows experience. But yeah, I think over time there'll be a draw towards pure Linux, and eventually I think Windows may end up being in a weird niche that no one would fathom it now, but we may be telling a different story 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Of course, people were saying that 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the diversion. I mean, Windows has won the desktop, and I think will continue to. And honestly, even the identity management side, they've pretty much won on that piece. Where Linux has really won a lot of like that file server stuff, and like I said, the DevOps stuff, and the stuff where people aren't interacting directly with the OS on a regular basis. So,
Sure.
I thought 15 years ago that Microsoft, to save money, would just build Windows on top of Linux, but it never happened. And then I thought, well, maybe they'll do it on the server part. Never happened. So
well,
I was a
nope.
little surprised when SQL Server came out on Linux, but the thing is, they saw it as an opportunity to expand their market share. It's a really nice database.
Well, and I think part of that is they saw the writing on the wall a lot. If they want to be in the cloud business, people aren't deploying Windows servers in the cloud, not to the any large
Windows
containers. Yeah, I mean, but even
no, I'm saying not
right.
Windows containers either. I think they realize that in that there's a world where they're just not going to ever gain the foothold. So I think it's the if you can't beat them, join them scenario.
Yep. And they've dipped their toes into some of that stuff too. They've done like deployments like Mono and some of those types of things over the years, and
but
they
just
never
haven't
really
taken off.
panned out. So
that's what I mean. I think they're seeing that writing on the wall.
Yeah,
but that's just opinion. Who knows what they're thinking?
And I mean, even the entire Azure stack is Linux under the hood, with a few exceptions like their directory stuff and some of those things. So
So getting back to the talk you gave, Rick, I'll just throw out another little thing of interest for some people is that when you talked about cron and cron tab, you can use that in CoFusion. I don't know about in Lucy, but in CoFusion, since CF10, I believe, scheduled tasks have supported using cron expressions for scheduling when they happen. And under the covers, it's really Quartz, which is an open source library that they've bundled with CoFusion to do the scheduled management. And it's Quartz that supports cron. And in fact, they quirkily added one more number to the front of the front. It's really weird, to the front of cron expressions in Quartz. There's a new additional number on the front. And so when you do cron expressions in the CF admin for scheduled tasks, unfortunately, you have to know that you can't just Google how to do a cron expression and drop it in. You have to Google how to do a Quartz cron expression. And there's actually a nice free cron expression builder on the web, and there's a Quartz variant of it. And both of them are great. You can either say what you want and see what the cron would be, or put in the cron and it'll tell you what it evaluates to in either platform, which is really nice. I've got a whole talk on scheduled tasks. I realized I never gave that to you guys. I gave it a couple years ago to the CF meetup and the Hawaii CFUG. But anyway, just letting you know.
Yep.
That's an interesting opportunity.
You'll have to update it for the big changes that happened with Lucy 6.2 and Lucy 7.
Well, and even today there were some discussions related to scheduled tasks being lost. I don't remember what was the distinctive feature that we want to make sure people knew about.
The way they handle scheduling is different now. You can go down to you can also do like chaining of tasks and some things like that. So they went to like a task scheduler as opposed to a like job scheduler.
Which is funny because that's what CF10 had added.
Right.
Chaining of tasks, misfiring, and some of it was in enterprise only, so some people didn't know about it. But some of it's not in enterprise only. And it's kind of funny that, that's one of those things where CF added it, in 2012, and not many people used it. And over the years, perhaps they used it and they learned to benefit from it. And then they moved to Lucy and said, hey, where's that in Lucy? So then they had to persuade the guys to add it. But I had not noticed that was something they'd added.
Yep.
So yeah, cool. Thank you for pointing that out.
But of course, their implementation is different than ACF's.
Yeah.
So
I think they wrote their own instead of leveraging Quartz, which is interesting because Quartz is a long time.
They use
updated.
I think they use some other, like the new Java scheduling thing. So it's not Quartz, but it's its own thing. Yeah.
Or native. Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I hadn't paid attention. Excellent.
So Rick, one thing that one script I ended up having to write today, I'll paste it in the chat there. Hopefully, probably not going to look super awesome, but we had a bash script we had to put together. Essentially, we've got about 650 or so emergency phones on campus, and we had to push firmware updates to all of them. So pushing the firmware updates was easy, but then afterwards they want you to reboot all of them. So part of that was we had to go through and we needed to essentially telnet to every one of these units and run and essentially log in as admin, enter in a password, and then type in the reboot command, and then the phone would essentially reboot. This script I just pasted in here is actually one of the bash scripts, like I said, we just did today, where we had a whole list of emergency phones that we just needed to quickly go and reboot them. And this thing took about, 5 minutes to run for about 600 devices.
Wow.
Just a 2-line, 3-line really bash script that we had.
Now I know what happened to my phone today, Nick. Thanks a lot. You didn't get my.
That wasn't the happened to your phone.
And Nick's like, you don't even have a phone. You don't have an office now. So who knows what my number will be, Nick?
Uh-huh.
Who knows where my office will be?
These are the emergency phones?
Yeah, the green light towers that we've got.
Okay.
But yeah, this essentially here what we did, and this is just like kind of the stuff you were showing. Um, we went and essentially just this right here goes and telnets to every single one of them in a from a list of a text file and just loops over it and just runs that command.
That is the power of Bash. Like I say, that's one of the reasons I liked it, and I thought it was worth my time to learn, even if it meant learning some Linux stuff that I normally had kind of avoided. Question for you, Charlie. The I noticed, and I've never had a problem, but I don't schedule a lot on CF. But Cold Fusion has had problems with tasks that run for 2 years, and all of a sudden they disappear, or they don't
Yes.
run. They run twice, and is that user error, or is there
Well, those are
something
different
in
things.
ports?
Those are different things. So let's clarify them disappearing. That's as a result, primarily, I would argue, of a update that started in April. There was one in April, then there was one in July. And Adobe was addressing a concern that somebody somehow leveraged a vulnerability where if a scheduled task published output, that's an option at the bottom of the scheduled task definition page. You can say, I want to publish the output of the whatever I called, whatever URL, what came back, write it to a file. Well, gosh, back in CF10 or somewhere, 2016, somewhere along the way, they said, well, you can no longer write to anything but a text file or a log file. And I thought, well, that's okay. That's limited enough. What more do we need? Well, somehow somebody got a wild hair. Some vulnerability happened. And in April, Adobe came out with an update where they said, actually, starting in January, they said, we've got a file called pathfilter.txt. And if you want to write to a file in a scheduled task as the published output of the URL call, if you want to be clear, we're not talking about what goes on in the page. We're talking about if the URL you're calling produces output, do you want to save it to a file? Well, that's always been there. And then starting in January, they added this pathfilter.txt, and you had to list what files and folders you wanted to write to. And then in April, they changed it to being a JSON file because there was another related thing. So anyway, now it's a JSON file. And here's the thing, starting with that April update, if you had a scheduled task that published output and you didn't properly whitelist its output location in that file, starting in April, they just deleted the scheduled task during startup. Again, somehow somebody thought this was a grave security vulnerability. We can't have scheduled tasks publishing output that haven't gotten permission from the whitelist. Get out of here. Delete it. Well, that was crazy because, yes, people started losing scheduled tasks left and right because who reads the tech notes? Who reads my blog post? Who pays attention to what's going on? Just do the update. It works. Cold Fusion came up. The app's working. I got to catch a flight. Well, anyway, in the July update, they tempered that and they changed it to say, okay, we're not going to delete them anymore. We're going to flag them during the startup to say we're not running it. And then the UI of the admin now also flags it with red that says, hey, this scheduled task isn't going to run because it's publishing output to a place that hasn't been whitelisted. Okay, so that's long answer to that question insofar as them being suddenly disappearing. There was a explanation at least for that. As far as them running twice, there's no feature in the schedule task mechanism that causes that. Various people have asserted that certain circumstances can lead to the URL that's called somehow being run twice, but it wasn't because the schedule task mechanism did it twice. I've had some people assert it's about the connector. I've had some people say it's about IIS. Let me just say the beauty of all these kind of problems is that if you know how to look at the diagnostics that are available, you can know what's going on. So there are diagnostic logs in that quartz thing I talked about. There's logs in
Mhm.
there. You can enable it to log every URL that gets called. By default, in Cold Fusion, when you run a scheduled task, it logs in the CF HTTP log every URL that's called from Cold Fusion. And then you can enable scheduled task logging that literally logs every scheduled task that runs. And then, of course, in your web server, you can log every request that it got and every request that it ran. And then if you have Fusion Reactor, you could log every request that got into Cold Fusion. And sometimes I've helped people find out that way that these double scheduled tasks that they see, it's actually from two different CF instances that somebody mistakenly left a scheduled task in two different instances and they were seeing it run twice. A database record got updated twice, or a log entry appeared twice. And in that case, it was just a simple matter of discerning, oh, we've got it running from two places. And if you only looked at the scheduled task log of the one place, it's only running once. But if the call was being made, let's say to a Cold Fusion page that happened to have Fusion Reactor, or even if you looked at your web server logs and saw the IP address from which it came, you might be able to readily discern, oh, it's running twice from different machines, or it could be the same machine but different instances of CF. And again, sometimes Fusion Reactor can help with discerning that better than web server logs can. So that's just a couple of examples of things that you hear people complain about. And there's a good explanation. Now, that's not to say there aren't some other weird problems that happen that are truly obscure and aren't readily understood. And if anybody ever brings it to me, I'll just guide them through these diagnostics and we'll find it. That's what I love doing, is solving those kind of problems. Randy's done that with me before.
That's good. I just read the Slack forum, and not just for this past year, but going back a decade or more.
He complains,
And
yeah.
just figure it was maybe some really obscure bug, but it just seemed to get repeated. But some of it's maybe programmer error.
Yeah, I would assert that, but not everybody would agree. So
Hey, real quick, Charlie, since you're on the line, Cold Fusion just sent me there's an update. I think I got it
yeah,
from
there's an update today. Update today, yes, sir. For all
I
three.
mean, we were just doing patches yesterday. It's like, well, there's nothing to do. Okay, we'll
That's
just move
right.
on.
You're
So,
1 day behind now. Well, you probably don't want to do it the day it comes out anyway, so maybe wait a couple days. But yes, there was an update released today for CF 21, 23, and 25,
yep.
and all three of them address the same thing, and it's listed as a critical vulnerability. Um, a path traversal problem that they never discuss what the problem is or how to recreate it, so you don't know how serious it is, but they call it on the APSB, the Adobe Product Security Bulletin, they call it a critical vulnerability. And so some people will have to get it done today or tomorrow. Others will go, yeah, I've been down this road before. I'll wait a couple days, or I'll wait till next week. But I'll tell you that I've implemented it on several machines now, several CF instances of all three versions, and I only had a problem on one, and I would assert that was some quirky behavior of that one. But same thing, just real quick for anybody listening and you guys, key thing about running CF updates, besides just do it and hope it works, is there's an update log in the CFusion HF updates folder. There'll be a new folder for the update you're applying. And in that folder, there'll be a log, big long name with today's date and time on it. And that's the update log. And in that log, about line 70, it tells you, did the update have successes or fatal errors or non-fatal errors? And you want to see zeros for those. And then at the very bottom, about 5, 10 lines from the bottom, it says, here's what packages I'm going to update. I'm downloading these packages. And they don't do them then. It's the next startup of CF that happens after the update. It's during that startup they update the packages. So again, you want to look at the Cold Fusion outlog and make sure at the bottom from what just got started, do you see it uninstalling the packages? And do you see it starting all the packages? And are there any errors? And usually there's none. But if there's any, that's where it's going to be. And, Rick, this goes back to your point about saying you see discussions on Slack, or, the Facebook CF programmers group, or the Adobe forums, or the Lucy forums, or the Ortus forums. Sometimes people offer answers to questions from their experience, and they feel confident that what you need to do is X. And I'm just going to tell you, I've been watching it too for now nearly 30 years. And a lot of times the what you need to do is X, that was right for them. It ain't right for everybody. And so, diagnostics is the key. I just can't stress enough. Follow the diagnostics. Let them guide you. if you know, and that's the thing. Not everybody knows where to look. I do what I can. I give the talks, I write the blog posts. But if you follow the diagnostics, you'll generally you'll either confirm you have no problem, or if you had a problem, you'll see what the problem is if you know how to, follow what it says. And I write blog posts, and I'll do one tonight about this update. One other thing I'll just throw out real quick, Randy, in case you do try to do it, and I covered this in my blog posts recently about each update, is that some people are finding that some problems happen even when there was no errors in the update and all the packages updated correctly, no errors in the Cofusion log outlog, things still went wrong. And in recent updates, Adobe has said, oh, just stop CF and delete the Felix cache folder in the CFusion bin or your instance name bin. So there's a Felix-cache folder. You delete that folder while CF is down, and you start it up, and CF creates it again. And many problems just go away after an update simply by doing that. And it's crazy that we have to do it. And they even did an update in April or January to do it themselves after the update, but it's not enough. We still are finding that sometimes you have to do it after the update has completed, after the packages were updated. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, thanks for that one. Yeah, we've it's almost like routine. Delete the Felix cache. Start there
Yes.
first.
Get into that habit. Unfortunately, so many people don't know. So I would stress it because, again, we know you guys might know, but who knows who's listening to this recording? And I hope it'll benefit them.
One announcement I wanted to make here is that next month we have Raymond Camden doing our first Boxlang presentation, introduction to it. And then Charlie is going to be in November and talking about CF Builder. And still working on the
Contrasting a bit.
next 2026 options, but we're trying to fill them as fast as we can. Some good meetings. We even had somebody that is talking about a second Boxlang. He wants to just concentrate on one or two areas, and we went from none to a wealth of it. Have you done much with Boxlang, Charlie?
Yeah, and I was thinking about proposing a talk for Into the Box about it, and that could be one that if your next two ones don't cover what I'm planning to cover, I'll throw it by you to see if it intrigues you guys.
Okay. One thing, I'm a big serverless guy, and I haven't had a chance to work with it yet, but they have implemented serverless, and we're still waiting on the other two providers to do it. And I give them big props on that because they said originally in the meeting I attended that it wasn't going to be for a year or more, and they must have changed their mind, or they had a client come that wanted to pay for it to get done, and they got it done.
Yep. And part of their whole architectural design facilitates that in a way that it couldn't be made to happen as well and readily given the architecture underlying CF and Lucy. So that's another one of those ones where I think they'll eventually, whoever wants that, it'll be conceded that Boxlang will perhaps be the way to go, unless one of the others comes around.
Well, they're both saying they're working on it, so
They've been saying it for a long time, right?
I know.
So, who knows?
I know.
Maybe.
You don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and
Right. Maybe. Keep hope alive.
yep, exactly.
Next thing, Charlie be telling us that I can't remember the name of the company, New Atlanta, is going to come out in another version. I thought that was pretty
No,
slick.
they're long. Yeah, they're gone. No, no more New Atlanta.
Now we got Boxlane competing with Lucy, and I always saw
It's funny to
Lucy.
watch how that evolution happens over the years.
Yep, yep.
When I came, when I was working with New Atlanta 22 years ago, 23 years ago, I was held in such derision for having the temerity to try to tell people they could run CFML on something other than Cold Fusion. How dare you? You're stealing from Adobe or Macromedia. And then just about the time I left the company, out came Rilo. Like, and then hey, everything's great. And some people will argue, yeah, that's because they were free and open source, but not at first, and that's where Rilo tried to do some money making thing, and then it didn't work out, and so Lucy became what it is, and never was money making. And New Atlanta had the OpenBD project come out, but that also just never really took off. So yeah, it's been interesting ride. And for those who don't know, CF's 30th birthday is this year. So the CF Summit later this month, they'll be celebrating the 30th birthday of CF.
I thought they
Well,
told me it
I
was dead.
remember the 10th or 15th birthday party at CF United.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember that too. And sorry, Randy, what did you say?
I thought they told me this language was dead.
Right. They were saying that back when they celebrated the 10th birthday 20 years ago. And the
Right.
5th birthday 25 years ago. Because I remember, I remember back in the 90s, late 90s, everybody was saying in 99, yeah, it'll never work. It'll never take off. ASP is going to crush it. PHP is going to crush it. It's on rolling. And, these evolutions and improvements from New Atlanta, from Rilo, from Lucy, from Boxlang are all evolving it in a positive way. For the long run, it should, one or the other is going to still be there. And I think more than one will be there for quite some time.